Hey guys, thank you for joining us for another Men's Bible Brief. If you can, join us on Wednesday mornings. The information is on the screen. If not, we got you covered on YouTube right here. Well, let's go ahead and join the brief in progress. God bless you. Hello, brothers. Welcome to another Men's Bible Brief. And yes, today is open mic, as is every first Wednesday. And so, boy, we had a really great open mic. And what I loved about this one is that every single question was a Bible question. Our open mic is open to all kinds of questions. We don't try to limit it in any way. But for whatever reason, God kind of orchestrated this one that every single question was a Bible question. And boy, it was an extensive one too. And so we can't go through all of them. Had about 12 different questions. We'll just pick the top 5 and address those questions. So this was a really great Bible briefing. It's just really exciting to see the guys really getting into the Word and want to understand the correct interpretation of a particular passage so they can correctly see God in the way He should be seen. So let me give you the Hump Day food for thought for the day. And here it is. Every person you see is someone Jesus thought enough of to die for. Remember that in how you treat others. And that's a good word. We live in a very cancel type culture and a grievance culture, and it's easy to really develop animus toward those who may disagree with us. That might be our Christian brothers and sisters, or they may not be our Christian brothers and sisters, but that Christ died for. And we must remember that. Doesn't mean we should apologize for our words. We surely should take a stand with our convictions, and we should definitely hold true to our convictions and the truth. But at the same time, we still have to relate to those we might disagree with strongly. So let's go ahead and jump into that. The first one comes from 1 John chapter 5, verse 16. And so it says, if anyone sees his brother committing a sin not leading to death, he shall ask, and God will give him life to those who commit sin not leading to death. There is a sin leading to death. I do not say that he should make requests for this. And so the question was, is there a sin leading to death? Or better, the question is, what is this sin that's leading to death? And John does not tell us. We don't know exactly what it is. Some take it to be unbelief. Some take it, where I land, is that it was some physical behavior that may have caused death. For example, we know that sexually transmitted diseases were very prominent in that culture. So if you got gonorrhea, and obviously they didn't have access to penicillin, that was probably a death sentence. And so gonorrhea would ravage your body, your mind, and eventually take your life. So that's a sin that could possibly lead to death. So I take it here he's probably talking about physical death. Some see it as purely unbelief. In other words, person didn't really believe. They thought they were a Christian, and they just learned the language, was a part of the Christian community, but really didn't believe, and they really were an unbeliever from beginning to end. And they would say that's a sin that leads to some kind of spiritual death. But I take it it's probably a physical sin that the community would have been aware of, again, due to its lack of technology, lack of medical technology, or medical advancements. It would have been a practice that actually would lead to death. So that's what I take in 1 John chapter 5, verse 16. Question number 2, and let me read it for you. It comes from Exodus chapter 21, verses 20 and 21. Exodus 21, verses 20 and 21. Here's how it reads. If a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. If, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. And the question is, does this kind of scripture actually condone American slavery? And I would say that's probably a misunderstanding. It's a great question, and I have a whole lecture that I do at Foster College that deals with was American slavery Christian? And maybe I'll do that again. I've done a couple of YouTube channel lessons on that as well, but we'll come back and look at that. But this is a classic text that has been abused, that I would say, by slave owners in America to justify their actions. It's a lack of understanding of ancient Near Eastern slavery. What was very common in that day was that when you went to war and you captured a nation, you would take captive their people or their populace into slavery. And in those days, particularly in that culture, you pretty much could do anything, everything, whatever you wanted to do to a slave, particularly a foreign slave. I mean, you could brutalize them and there was no legal recourse whatsoever. And so here it's probably a reference to that kind of slavery where Israel conquered a surrounding enemy and made someone a slave. And God's putting a limit. He's basically putting a guardrail. Say, hey, I know other nations do anything, okay, but for you, okay, if they survive, if they don't survive after 2 days or what have you, there's some consequences there. And I know for the modern mind, that was, oh gosh, that's egregious. But understand, to have this kind of legislation in the Torah at this stage of ancient Near Eastern history was light years ahead of the culture. And it really raised an issue. It really raised the issue of God's sovereignty with human will. A lot of us would want a God to just come in, step in, and just remove all oppression, remove all sin, remove all slavery, remove all wars, remove all dictators, all economic disasters. The problem with that is once God steps in, it takes away also human will. In other words, the people who want and choose to do so. And so what God does, he does the latter. He gives humanity the option to choose the right way to do. The problem is history is filled with nations and peoples who have chosen the wrong way. Now, sometimes God will step in and exact justice. In many cases, he's done that. And we don't judge or know exactly how God's sovereign work with that. But it really has to do with God giving human society an opportunity to do the right thing because they want this freedom. God honors that freedom, but at some point he definitely does step in and will judge. And so this would be a case in which the scripture was abused. The other one is Matthew 5, 40 and 41, where Jesus talks about going the extra mile. And verse 40, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Whoever forced you to go 1 mile, go with him too. And obviously the abuse being, well, if he's beating your back, let him also beat your arms and your legs as well. No, that's a misapplication. That's not what Jesus is dealing with. This is the Sermon on the Mount. Completely different idea. But as I've said before, you can make the Bible say anything. The problem is Hebrews 4 says the word is a two-edged sword, meaning that when we dish out the word, it does cut people. But if it always cuts people and never cuts me, it's probably not the truth. That the word, it will cut, it will challenge others. But if it never convicts me, there's the problem. There's the problem. And we live in a day where Christians are very comfortable in choosing scriptures that they like, choosing scriptures that benefit them, but ignoring scriptures that may convict them. And we cannot fall in that trap. The Bible is a two-edged sword. Please remember that as well. Question number 3 comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Verse 9, where Paul talks about, he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for the power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I would rather boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. And the question is, well, what is this thorn in the flesh that was inflicted upon Paul to utter this statement about God's grace being sufficient for him, or God telling him his grace is sufficient for him? And a lot of speculation as to what the thorn is. I have no idea what the thorn was. Okay, some say sickness, some eye disease, some limp, some say maybe his pride because he had been given such a great revelation. But I think it's a word more than anything it's a reminder that we're normal people, we're ordinary people. And maybe this thorn was given to Paul because he did get a little bit beside himself. He was a tremendous apostle. He was a literary genius. His theology was absolutely second to none. Clearly had an incredible impact on what we practice today as Christians. And for some, that would go to their head. Paul didn't have the best relationship. He was an incredible apostle, But boy, he and Barnabas didn't get along. I mean, he had some strained relationships with the Corinthians, I think rightfully so in some cases, with other churches. You know, he didn't have the best relationship management skills, probably. And I'm speculating. But maybe the text is talking about a little bit of humility. And I think that's something we need desperately in today's culture, that we must be humble in our walk with God and with others. Humble does not mean weakness. It does not mean humiliation. We're not to shy away from our opinions or just let people walk over us. But humble means we must have the right estimation of ourselves. Don't think too high of ourselves. Don't think too low of ourselves. Simply be normal, be thankful, and give the best we can at the time. I think that's what the point is. And so again, 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9, what is the thorn? I'm really not sure. I think the point is, let's make sure we have a proper estimation of who we really are. Number 4 comes from John, the Gospel of John, verses 9 and chapter 9, verse 6 and 7, where it says, when he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of spittle and applied the clay to his eyes and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And so he went away and washed and came back seeing. And so the question is, the whole idea of Jesus working with dirt, is that an allusion to God who was working with dirt when he created Adam? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know. It may not be. That may be what have clued in the readers of John, or those who were there listening to this message. But this is a miracle. In the Gospel of John, I do know there's 7 miracles, and with each miracle there's an I am statement. So it's a statement about his nature. It's about who he is. And he will say later on in this passage that I am the light of the world. Oh, he says it in verse 5. So he says it actually before he gets to the pool of Siloam. But he says, chapter 9, verse 5, I am the light of the world. So clearly, the miracle becomes a metaphor for how he brings light to the world. He opens blind eyes to see who he really is. That's the point. I think it's more a word about unbelief, because later on in the passage, the religious leadership will get into a heated debate with the person who was blind and was healed by Jesus. And he's supposed to be like the spiritual or theological pygmy, or the midget, if you will. The religious leaders who know the scriptures cannot believe that a miracle was done by God right here. And he's like, it's really 2 + 2 = 4. How can you not see who Jesus is? And it just speaks to the depth of the blindness of religious leaders, and many times of people, that we can be so entrenched in our own ideas that we can't see the truth right before our eyes. So I think it's a word to all of us. Let's make sure we're humble when God speaks to our hearts. Don't be so dogmatic to think you know everything. Always remember there's something we can always learn about who God is and how he moves. And then the last one, brothers, comes from Psalm 137. I want to encourage you to read the entire psalm, but verse 9. Tremendous psalm, has caused some consternation, but I'm going to read it for you. It says, how blessed will be the ones who sees this and dashes your little ones, or your infants, or your babies against the rock. So the question is, how could God possibly condone such behavior? How can this make it in the scriptures? Okay, this is called an imprecatory song, where some psalms the worshiper would ask God to curse their enemies. That's what makes Jesus so radical. He doesn't come cursing enemies. He says, no, you need to love your enemies, not this kind of modern emotional love, but it's a sense in terms of believing that these people are made in the image of God. That is his whole point. That's a whole nother discussion. Ain't got time to get into that. But here it was very common for people in that culture to call down curses on their enemies. This is an exilic psalm, meaning this was a psalm that was written probably during a time when Israel was in a Babylonian exile. That's what it seems to be when you read the details. And they talk about by the rivers of Babylon in verse 1. So this would be during the time when Nebuchadnezzar took the nation into exile. So part of their worship was to bring their grievances before God. It doesn't mean that God answered this prayer, but what it does mean is that God created the space in their worship services in their walk with God, that they could bring any grievance to him, any suffering, any oppression, any injustice, they could bring it to them. And this would have been a time that Israel would have suffered miserably under the oppressive hand of Nebuchadnezzar. And so this is their wish. That there's so much hate in my heart. I hope that another conquering nation will take your infants and dash them against the rocks. And to me, it's more of an issue of being honest with God in terms of how they feel in the moment. And even in the Christian church today, we have not gotten to the place where we can express that kind of raw emotion before God as we walk in life. And God can hear that, and he can deal with that, and he's open to that. That we can walk with him and tell him exactly how we're feeling. We don't have to hide and stuff these feelings when we feel like we've been betrayed or we've suffered some kind of injustice or our heart has been brutally shredded. We can come to God with our hearts that have been horribly broken and say exactly what's on our heart and know that God will give us comfort in our time of need. And so I think that's what the psalm is after. At the time when it was written, maybe they were hoping for the curse. God didn't do that, even though God would judge Nebuchadnezzar when the Medo-Persian Empire would come and conquer Babylon. Definitely would judge the nation. But more so, I think it's more about where the people of God, Israel, could come into God's presence and share exactly what's on their heart. And so those were the 5 questions I thought I would share with you today. It was a very, very good men's brief. God bless you. And we'll be looking for you in the next video. Take care.